Okay, guys, so welcome to Gary and to Rob. Going to tell us about an exciting world tour that you're doing of the UK. So, first of all,
world tour of the UK.
Do you like that?
I do. I'll take it.
So, go on, Gary, you can start us off then. What's the plan behind the tour? What are we going to be doing?
What the plan is to hit some spots around the UK, starting off in Liverpool. And I think right now we have 7 talks lined up. And the name of this roadshow that we're doing is called The Legendary Drums and Drumming of a Star. And it's all about Ringo. So what we put together is a nice PowerPoint presentation that gives a lot of in-depth information about Ringo, his first interest in drums, his first drum sets, going all the way through to the end of his Beatles career. And in between, there's a lot of backstories that people may not have heard. I know there's some that they definitely haven't heard. And along the way, we're talking about Ringo's progression in drumming and his drumming styles. And for that, we have Rob Bryan. Take it away, Rob.
Beautifully done, Gary.
What a segue. You'd almost planned that one. Well done.
Man, our double act, Dave.
Go on then, Rob. Tell us all about it. What are you going to be doing?
Okay, so my pathway through this is that obviously I'm a massive lover of the Beatles and of Ringo. And he was one of my first influences, apart from my father and Joe Morello and Buddy Rich and a few of the obvious cats, as they say. And I've got the opportunity to work with Gary. We also know about his legacy, to do these things where I could speak from the drummer's point of view. Because obviously I was lucky enough to carve a career playing drums for a living. And it never failed to amaze me how many times I'd work in a studio or in a live situation. And, because of those things, you leave the Ringo thing or your influences at the door, you come and play the gig. But the amount of people that would say to me, what would Ringo do? Or can you give me that Ringo thing, whether it be a feel or the way he played the hats, a groove, just something, or playing no hat for a while, just snare and bass, that, it stay logged in there. And the more people I spoke to, they used to say to me, as I say, musicians, producers, engineers, not just drummers, and say, man, he's one of my favorite drummers. And of course, we expect Steve Gadd, Collie Utah, and all the big, those kind of clinician guys. But Ringo's thread is going through all of those drummers. And it influenced me so much that it made me a couple of years ago think I want to do some workshops or masterclasses on his drumming, because it's so important. And I'm not going in there with a wig as a lookalike and leading with my left hand. It's not about that. It's about musically what he brought. He could be right-handed, left-handed, traditional grip, match grip. It doesn't matter. It's the way he played the drum. So I'm getting into the weeds with that kind of thing, into the microscopic stuff. Because people say, oh, Ticket to Ride, we know. It's like, guys, there's so much more than that. The way he drives the hat, the way he plays the snare, so many little things that go on that us drummers mostly know about, but there's some things that I've spoken to people that they thought they knew a lot, and there's a few little tidbits I could throw in. They were like, oh my god, I didn't know that. So the next time they heard Sergeant Prepper's reprise, they were like, oh, that hi-hat bit, oh my god, he really is playing those sort of last 3 beats louder. Does he mean to? It's like, probably not, but what a groove it creates, what a feel. So I'm coming in to work off of Gary. So when Gary's talked about a various setup or various kit from a various time, we can start looking at some of the tracks from that period and say, hey, this is something he was getting onto doing, and so on. So, yeah, look at me. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I love it. I'm excited. I'm so excited to be able to share it with people, because I know people just go, no, really? And I love that sort of little moment. I just love it.
Yeah. I mean, as Gary knows, having grown up in the Dingle, gone to the school that Ringo had gone to, he was always my first favourite Beatle. Right. And I still get fed up where people just think, oh, he was lucky. He was fortunate. He was playing with John, Paul and George. And yeah, you could put another drummer in there. But I think that the key word that you said, Gary, is what I'm looking forward to from this is his progression, not just in his own drumming, but what he contributed to the Beatles songs as well. So pick out a couple of those bits for us.
Yeah, well, it's just like I mean, there are the benchmarks, if you do something from, like, say, I Feel Fine, I mean, that was a takeaway. And, I talked to Ringo about that. This is a little interesting story. He said that there was one time when he filled in for Pete, and when they were doing, get the name of the song, the I Feel Fine, come on, help me there.
What did I say? What did I say?
What did I say, Ray Charles? That's one that Paul mentions.
You can edit that out. but
not a chance.
Thank you very much. But Ringo said that they did that song, and Ringo was doing the groove, with the cymbals and the tom and the snare, and he said that he clearly remembered John like turning around and looking at him. It was like, yeah, So that was one of the times when he said he knew the front line was like, this is the guy. So
amazing.
But the point is, it's going through all those different types of songs, whether it's Tomorrow Never Knows or all the way up to the drum solo for the end, and it's not just his drumming, and the little intrinsic things that are, that you really have to drill into, but it's also, his feel, the sound of his drums, the way he kept changing things up from the snare being really high pitched, early on, to, like a song like Let It Be, where it was so deep, using tea towels, all those things. And, the way the drums were mic'd, having the bottom heads off, using calfskin heads, all those things made such a huge difference in the songs. And it's, it was just musical, with what he accomplished.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question, and I remember when I was doing my Fan in the Fourth Beatle book, I was trying to find out what was it about Ringo that made him stand out. So maybe this is one for you as well, Rob. Is the phrase is always used? Ringo knew how to play the song. Now, to me, that's something that can't be taught. But how do you interpret that?
Me personally, is that right, Gary, if I shoot in here?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I think that, like all of the Beatles have said, they had a wide range of music. They listened to a wide range of music from their parents' record player, big band, music hall, the shows, all of those things, which are classic kind of song forms. And I think one of the primary things that they all knew was, how to listen and react to a classic song, where you can almost think, hang on a minute, there's going to be a bridge in a minute. Oh, yes, there is, or this is going to go into a solo, or it's going to end in a minute, 3-time ending, da, 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 boom. Yes. It's all through listening and osmosis. And I think that was so deep into their psyche as kids, listening to that wide range of music, and then rock and roll when it came in, which actually probably seemed quite simple than some of the sort of Sinatra stuff they'd been listening to and show stuff. But you know what? Those templates were already in place. Now, I had chats with 2 other drummers about this, and we could talk about it more obviously here and in the shows. But I really believe that he had that already there, as well as his love for swing music. Now, okay, he might not have been, when people talk about swing music and Bonham, they see that a bit more of a closer sort of kind of kinsmanship. But Ringo has it, as us fans know, in spades. Charlie Watts had it too. So I think when he was feeling the straight note, he was always swinging it anyway. So I think all those formal things, which weren't really taught, they were just through osmosis, I think really gave him the idea. And even though Get Back was a lot later, 69, I know. But I was saying to someone, for people who don't really believe this kind of thing, I say, go and watch and sit through the documentary when they suddenly crack into, like, I don't know, Blue Suede Shoes or a show tune with a ding, ding, a swing feel. They instantly all play that feel as if they were, like, dare I say, session musicians. They can actually play that well because, as I say, it's already gone through and they know what it is. So you take all of that learning and listening and you put it into original music, you end up with a band like the Beatles. That's where it all comes from. And that's why I think that line of drumming and that period of player, always extremely interesting for me. So I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah. And I would agree. It's interesting, too, when you go back to the beginning. You are right. At least in Ringo's world, with being introduced to so much different music by his parents, from big band and jazz and different things. And Ringo talks about his community where on weekends, it seemed like it was basically a house party, where people would just all get together, bring an instrument, play songs. Everybody had to, sing a line of something. But it sounded like even though they didn't have much, they had a lot. And with Ringo, I think he was just blessed with that that impossible, or that very rare feel, where he could listen, just as we do many times. If you're playing by ear, you'll hear something and it's, oh yeah, God, that's interesting. I know how to do it. And you just sit down and you can make it happen. But with Ringo, it seems like you can imitate him, but you can't emulate, or you can emulate, but you really can't nail what he does. There's just something undefined in his playing. And other thing that I was thinking about, and both of you will get this one, isn't it amazing for all the time they spent in the studio? And you go all the way through, and now you're watching them with the documentary. And it just reinforces the fact that when they're building a song and talking about it, it's nothing structured about, talking about things musically. It's just like, hey, why don't we move that bit? And they all knew what they were talking about. And it's like, but there was no musical, definition in their vocabulary.
And I think that's one of the key things, because I've always used my excuse of never learning to read or write music because the Beatles didn't.
Me too.
But I remember a conversation decades ago with a piano teacher who was classically trained and was a piano teacher as well. And she could play to the music. And then I would get on the piano and just play a bit of boogie woogie. And she said, I can't do that. So because that goes against everything I've been taught. And I think that's one of the greatest things. The fact that none of them had that formal training meant there were no rules to break. It was what feels good, which I think sort of brings us back to what we were saying just now about Ringo's idea of playing the song. He played what he felt. There was no sort of, here's a list of all the rules you're supposed to obey. They went with what felt right. And I think maybe if you've got that formal training, you can't do that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I lecture at BIM and places like that, and I try and cross the line between letting people play from ear as well as, the formal education, and going back to what we're all saying here is that we're of an age, where we would sit in with people and they'd say, just watch me. Now, when I've explained this to students, they go, what? There's nothing written, or you haven't got an MP3 first. I say, no, you watch old Joe on the piano, because I used to play in those pubs in Bath and stuff like that, in Bristol. My dad would take me along and say, just sit in and follow him. And some would say, here, young'un, follow my foot. And he'd be watching his foot, and all this stuff. And I think those guys were playing so long in Hamburg and at those places, they'd say, let's just do a blues. They'd jam it and they'd be watching each other for the changes. And there's something lost in time with that kind of education. And I try and do it with the students, and they do flip out. They're like, oh my God. And I say, well, this is what it's like in rock and roll and in jazz. Sometimes you just play, you follow, you listen, you trust your head and your heart. And again, it goes back to what we're saying here with the Beatles. They did exactly that. There was some formal stuff only because of what they've heard, but they could then process that in real time on the stage, which is an art in itself. Just doing an exam to do it is one thing, but actually reproducing on the stage with feel and with love, man, that's why we get these great bands. And that's why, thankfully, we had the Beatles,
Yeah, and it's like you're saying, with Hamburg, if you've got to play those 6, 7, 8 hours a night, it's as I think it was George who said, you couldn't just learn, here's a Chuck Berry song on an album. You learned every song on the album, and then you learned every album, and you got the singles, and you learned the B-sides. And to fill that amount of time, you had to call on every song you'd ever heard. And we know they had show tunes in there. We know there was that music hall background. And I think one of the great things that maybe Ringo could come back on is his time with the Hurricanes, when you're playing that summer season at the holiday camps, you can't be standing up there and playing hardcore rock and roll. You've got to have such a variety of songs that's acceptable to the parents as well as the kids, haven't you?
Absolutely.
And I think that must have been a great learning experience for him.
Yeah.
With so many songs.
It was a stepping stone from the albums to Butlins and what they had to do there. And you know what was interesting when I was talking to Ringo, it's so much more powerful when you're sitting with him just a few feet away, and just so you can see, you know, his body reaction, his facial expressions, and things like that. And he talked about Hamburg and Rory Storm and the Hurricanes with me, and he said, you know, he goes that we would just play, you know, and he was talking about the long hours, and he says we just loved it, and he goes, and if I can't even duplicate how he sounded, but he says, so he goes, if we had somebody in another band, he says, I'm tired, you know, and he's going like, well, you would say, booger off, you know, he goes, we just keep playing, you know, and then even if they had these long days, if it was the Beatles with the last set, because of how they were playing together initially, you know, Ringo would, the others would go home or go out, you know, but Ringo would just sit there hammered and listen to the guys, you know, and yell out songs for them to do. So it just seems like they couldn't get enough, you know. So that was all part of what they had in common. They just loved music.
And it sort of picks up a bit of what you were saying before, Rob, that maybe with youngsters today, they're not prepared to go through that kind of training. You know, if you think of the hundreds and hundreds of hours that, even if you go from that, the Quarrymen starting in 56, well, it takes them 6 years before the first record is out. Look at that apprenticeship that they put in. Look at the hard work, playing 3 times a day, playing absolutely anywhere. That was their musical education. And so when it then comes to doing, you know, like their first UK tours, they did it in 63. Well, playing for half an hour, even though it was day after day after day, that was nothing to them at all. They could do that. And, you know, when they go in and they make their first album, they spend hours in the studio making Please Please Me. And the engineer's saying, I've never seen such a hard-working group of musicians. This was nothing to them. You know, because they'd had that.
There was a book, I can't remember the author's name, but in the book he talks about the 10,000 hour rule. For, you know, to be a master at your craft. And I mentioned that to Ringo as well, and he just, because I think we were mentioned in the book, you know, but that's just a perfect example, you know, of just because they, even if you go to certain websites online that'll have like you know, what the Beatles did today, you know, and if you look at it, and if you start mapping out like on a map of the UK, and you're seeing where they're playing and knowing, you know, the business as we do, it's like, okay, you know, playing is the easy part, but the travel, the setup, the breakdown, you know, it's like, whoops, I need a drum head, or we need string, you know, having to do all those little things, you know, it's not fun, you know, and
it was hard.
You know, even if you have, this is where they have us sleeping, you know.
Exactly.
And then so you're fatigued, but yet you're still plugging along, and they never complained. They just did it. And there's so many people that just couldn't do that now.
No, exactly. And, you know, particularly, like you're saying, you look at 63, it was 4 UK tours, foreign trip to Sweden. In between that, there's 2 albums, there's at least 4 singles, all the radio shows and interviews, newspaper interviews, all of that, you know, trying to slot in somewhere to record their first album. Well, Brian's thinking, well, I've got a day I can give you there. You know, and John turns up with hardly any voice. And yet they put that kind of performance in. But they were such perfectionists because they've done all those hundreds and thousands of hours. This is what it was all leading up to.
And the other point, too, is I mean, it's evident when you listen to all the information that's out there, all the songs, whether it's the BBC and stuff like that, to play, some of the basic songs over and over and over and over and over. When they do it with energy, and it's just like, hey, we just learned this one. It's just there's so much life in what they put down on tape. It's just absolutely amazing.
That is true. I was playing She Loves You to someone the other day, and who necessarily, they weren't necessarily big Beatle fans. But I said, can you feel from that dum 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 from the start of that tom feel? Can you feel the energy? And they were like, yeah, you really can. And that goes through all of those early 4 or 5, Beatlemania style albums, right the way up to Rubber Soul, where it's, starts to progress a little bit more and mature a bit more. But the energy that comes off, like Help, you drop the needle on Help, and you just
straight in.
Do you know what I mean? You just hear it. And someone like myself, who like you guys too, works in the studio a lot. That's hard to reproduce on a record. That's so hard, man, because it's got to come from more than just physically playing the instrument. It comes from deeper inside that. And one of the things I think Paul said the Beatles he's proud of was always emanating love through the music and through their message. And I still feel it today. And I think that's what younger people feel as well when they hear it or coming for the first time. But no matter which song it is, but none of the songs ever sound like they're just going through the motions, is what I'm saying as well. You don't drop the needle and come together and think, oh, that's just kind of some swampy thing they're having a go at. No, you feel it for that 3 minutes. You're living that swampy vibe with them. And that can go through Yesterday, a ballad, through to She Said, Tomorrow Never Knows. That's, all of it is believed and felt. Would you guys agree? I mean, it's
completely.
A definite love of whatever they're doing. It's 1,000,000% on this, lads. We're doing this. And, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years later, it'll still do its thing.
Yeah. I think the key thing, if you listen to the albums from the start, they never thought, we found our groove, we found our sound, we're going to stick with this.
Exactly.
No, they never settled for anything. They pushed boundaries. And most of the time, well, obviously early on, they only had 2 tracks to play with. They know, wow, luxury, we've got 4 tracks. Well, that's next to nothing, is it? It's ridiculous. So you need the genius of George Martin and the engineers, but for them being able to put that together and put those songs and then push those boundaries every time, trying something new. What other band does that? Because most bands, you say, oh, that's their sound. I know that's them. Yeah. You cannot pigeonhole the Beatles into any genre, can you?
You can't.
I really feel blessed to have grown up with them, seeing for me in the US, seeing them on the Ed Sullivan Show. And with that alone, with my experience and obviously millions and millions of others, when have you seen like 4 kids, in their early 20s, be on a national show and perform and literally, overnight change music, change society. It was all, you could almost write it like, okay, 73 million people were watching TV and a Martian came on and everybody just kind of went, oh, we're following you, but every time an album would come out, when you were growing through it, you'd hear all the other music out there. And then every time a new Beatles album would come out, it would always be a little different, especially once they got into like the Rubber Soul and stuff. And you'd be like, that doesn't sound like the Beatles. I don't know if I like this song. And next thing you know, you're hearing it everywhere and you can't get enough of it. And it just went continuously like in that pattern. And the other thing I wanted to mention, not to ramble, but with us doing this, we're just like one of thousands and thousands of people all over the world, doing this. South America, all over Europe, all over the US. Every time I go to, like Beatle events, as you know, Dave, it's just, there's always something. It's like, hey, can I catch you to do a podcast later? It's just like, yeah. From Cincinnati, and I'm going like, really, so but it's just, there's just so much love and respect for these guys.
Yeah, agreed.
No, that's great. I mean, if this is just a glimpse into the roadshows coming up, who would not want to be there? Because it's going to be fantastic. Going to be absolutely fantastic. So we've got the first one coming up soon, haven't we, Gary, in Liverpool?
Yeah, February 3rd. And with that kickoff, what is really, really cool is the fact that we're having it at St. Peter's Church Hall, where John met Paul. And that's just going to be an awesome experience, especially for people that never been in there. And at the start of this event, we have something really cool and different to kick it off. And that involves Dave Bedford. Ooh. And I'll let you talk about a surprise guest that we're going to have. And it's just going to be that's going to be a magical time.
Well, it is going to be wonderful because we've got the first ever drummer in Colin Hanton joining us, and one of the greatest privileges of my career was last year officially joining the Quarrymen and playing with them, which is it's mind blowing because I've known these guys for so many years and we have so much fun. And I just love spending time with them. But we just thought it just works perfectly, doesn't it? Got the first event in Liverpool where John met Paul with Colin Hanton, the Quarrymen drummer. And it's going to be a great event. And obviously not a massive capacity crowd, so I'm expecting the tickets will sell very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be good fun. So where else are you going after that?
Sorry for any lens flare here, but February the 4th, Nickelback Brains Drum 1. And on the 5th, we're at Flint in North Wales at the Royal British Legion Social Club with Matty Roberts, of course. And then on the 6th, we're in Coventry at the Standard Triumph Club, which I think is where they've had the vintage drum show for the last few years. So we're there. And then we're doing one with Sticky Wicket at Bishop's Castle at the 3 Tons. That's Wednesday the 7th. And then we're in Worcester on February the 9th at a venue called Spin the Black Circle. But all of these things... Oh, there's 2 more, I'm sorry. One in Redditch on September the 10th. Gary, my goodness, we're going to be so tired, my man.
It's September the 10th.
Yeah, Saturday, February the 10th.
Good. I just thought there's a bit of a gap there.
Sorry. That's at Redditch with the Palace Drum Camp people, which of course is Matthew Green, who's a legend in his own right. So that's all the dates. They run from like basically the 3rd right up to the 10th. And that's a lot of shows, right? And I think there's still another one in the hanging, I think, as well, that might be put in as well. So, but all of them are on Gary's website, which is ringosbeatlekits.com. And if you go to speaking engagements along the top, you'll click on speaking engagements and they all come up with a link to the venues and so on. And all the information's there. And tickets are starting to sell. I've had 3 or 4 just go this morning. People messaging me saying that I've just bought my ticket, Rob. So, get in there quick, guys and gals.
Yeah. It's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. We'll have good fun. And hopefully, let's celebrate Mr. Ringo and everything that he has done. And it's one of those great things that I still think personally he's underrated for his contribution in the Beatles. And I think because I'm not a drummer, so I have utmost respect for drummers because I can't coordinate 4 limbs. Guitar and piano, I'm okay, but 4 limbs I can't do. But being able to do what he did, and I'm sure you'll touch on this, guy when you talk through the kits, with such a basic kit almost. I grew up in the 70s, and of course, I'm looking at these rock bands, like 2 bass drums, loads of toms, cymbals everywhere, and these massive kits with all the prog rock bands and stuff. He just kept it so simple, and yet brought such a variety to his sound. How is that possible?
Yeah, well, he talked about that in depth with me, and I'll share that when with the people that show up.
Easter egg for you there, yeah. Whoa.
Yeah. No, it's going to be great. Looking forward to it. We'll promote the website as well, so people can get tickets. And guys, I will see you on February the 3rd at St. Peter's Church in Wilton.
Looking forward to it.
Stay well, guys.
Take care.
Take care.
Oh, yeah. What do you call the guy who hangs around with musicians?
A drummer.
A drummer is correct. Well done. Boom, boom.
I know all the gags. I tell you what, if anyone can come to any of these drum shows and tell me a drum joke that I don't know, I'll think of something I can give them. I don't know, a drum head or something. But
very good.
The gag
A used drum head.
Yeah, used drum head. Yeah, a broken one.
Yeah, perfect. That's drummers for you. You can't beat them.
Well, yeah.
See you guys.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.
See you. Bye.